went back to the house and we had a cup of tea and the tears came. Nothing bad had actually happened. Like the reality was nothing bad had happened. But there was this emotion that was sparked.
We're going to intersect on some of the advice that actually makes the situation harder for you. Accidental, innocent sabotage.
When you're in a situation, whether it was your imagination, whether it matched up with reality or not, you've sparked off your nervous system by having this thought or your worst fear, something like that, and you're adrenalizing, you're doing all that. And the fire is here.
I used to think, but our emotions aren't always valid because sometimes my emotions, like saying I'm really angry with somebody, and I'm like, well, that emotion's not valid because I'm angry with this person. In this case, I'm angry with this person from a misunderstanding. I'm angry with this person because I'm thinking that they did something on purpose. And this is the little misunderstanding.
After all of this episode, I have this beautiful little, I hope you all do too, spark, fire, pot, stove.
Hello, my beautiful friends. My name is Dr. Becc.
And I am Kristeen Barker, and this is Am I Doing It Wrong? A podcast for doctors by doctors. Every week on the pod, we'll be bringing you conversations which shine light in dark places, normalise the doctor journey, ease unnecessary suffering, and give you actionable steps to thrive in all facets of your life. So grab a cuppa and get cozy for this week's episode of Am I Doing It Wrong? The podcast for doctors by doctors.
Welcome back to the potty, our beautiful friends, our doctor humans. And today we have got an unexpected way to feel good fast. It is not something that you've ever heard before. In fact, we're going to intersect on some of the advice that you probably have heard before a million times, that you probably replay in your head when you're in that sticky, stuck position that actually self-sabotages you, that actually makes things worse for you. It actually makes the situation harder for you. So we're going to intersect on that little moment of accidental, innocent sabotage, and we're going to show you how to tweak that moment to give you back your sense of not only, but also control in that situation and set you back on track for the day. Because we know how easy it is for a part of your day, as you know, in clinical medicine, for one small part of your day to absolutely derail you. And that's because of this spiral that activating our stress system can set us off into. And clinical medicine is chaotic. You do not get to live your clinical medicine life and not have your stress system activated. The goal isn't to not ever activate it at any time. That is way out of your control as a human with our current biology and nervous system set up. But what you can do, and what we are going to help you do today, is when you have that moment of it being activated, intersect on it to stop it from escalating, which is what most of us accidentally, innocently do. We let that response escalate. And instead, we're going to set you back on the path of de-escalating and getting back into calm and control. So Kristeen and I are so excited to talk to you about this today. And we're going to start off with a story from Kristeen's life. And also, the reason this question and that Kristeen really wanted to bring us this solution today is because she's taking her exam candidates through their BPT exams through her program, Rock Your Long Case, which she actually asked me not to talk about. Sorry, Kristeen. But I have to let you guys know that this is coming from a place of a real life challenge, a real life problem for doctors today. And you guys know what it's like, whether you're a consultant and you finished your exams or whether you're going through it right now, you know how precious your energy is, and you know how detrimental it can be to have one of those stress spirals set off, and the way that it can derail your day, not only time-wise and logistically, but I think more significantly in terms of draining your energy, because you need that precious energy at the end of your day to study. And you need that energy so your brain can actually integrate and consolidate all of the precious learning that it's doing. So I'm so grateful for you bringing this up for us, Kristeen, for everybody to benefit from. And let's start with this story of how this came up in your life.
Yeah, it's so top of mind, but it was just, yeah, I thought it's so applicable to doctors, whether you've got exams or not, which is why I sort of said, don't mention rock your long case, because I want it to be for everyone. And I think we can all relate to this. Like you say, Beck, like stress comes up, emotions and everything come up with that. And so I think what we would want to do today is sort of bring this to you, so you can use these techniques in a hot minute to feel better. But the story that made this so prominent in my mind is actually just completely away from medicine. But I was with my partner and his parents one day, and we were out for dinner. And during the dinner, his mum, and so my partner's mum, was trying to get a hold of her dad. And he's this elderly chap. He's like 87. He's super sweet, lives on his own, not too far from where we were having dinner. But he just wasn't getting back to her. And you could tell, like, the more the evening went on, it was bothering her. So once we, got out of there, finished dinner, we went to his house, right? We went to to my partner's granddad's house, and just to check on him, because he wasn't picking up the phone and he wasn't answering the door. And so it was like, okay, well, he's not answering the door. Where is he? Could he be with someone? Could he? And then we phoned to see if he was with some other relatives. He wasn't with them. And he's a very routine wee man. He's very routine. Like you can bank on any one day. He'll have his routine and he'll be whatever he usually is on that day. So this was a Saturday night. He was supposed to be in his house. He was nowhere else. And so this was really worrying. And no matter how much we tried to look in every window, every door, he just was not coming to the door. So, of course, my partner's mum started to get upset, right? She started to think the worst. She started to think, has he had a fall? Has he collapsed? Has, a million things I'm sure were running through her mind, but her worst fears ultimately were coming to life. And we're thinking, what are we going to do? Now, within that minute, where she was sort of having this emotional response to this and thinking the worst, and you could see it in her face, in that 5 or 10 minutes, we tried again, and there he was, popped up at the door, just came. He was large as life, completely intact. Nothing bad had happened to him. He just hadn't heard the door because he's deaf, right? So it was like nothing bad had actually happened. Like the reality was nothing bad had happened. But there was this emotion that was sparked in my partner's mum. And so we went back to the house and we had a cup of tea, and the tears came. The tears came, and she just had to get all of those tears out, right? And my partner was like, everything's okay, nothing happened, like reassurance, plus, plus, plus. Let's sprinkle on the reassurance and have a cup of tea. But it was just so obvious to me in this moment that it didn't matter, that nothing bad had actually happened, that this emotion had like sparked and it had to run its course. Like it had to get out of her body. Like it didn't matter whether it was true that something bad had happened or whether she had just imagined something had happened. The body doesn't know the difference, and the body was doing what it did. And so she had this horrible, horrible kind of grief response or panic or fear or whatever it was. And she had to have a really good cry about it. And I'm talking about like that took for her to have that emotional response, it was like 20 or 30 minutes until she was right as rain again, And obviously just knowing that that's what was happening, we allowed space for that. And then she did kind of right herself. But I think it was such an interesting thing because I think that although that's just one example of that, and maybe, people listening, you might have had a similar experience. I know I have when it's come to my family's health and things where it doesn't matter that they were okay. Like you do get that horrible feeling, that fear in your body. That's happened to me as well. So, but I think it's really interesting when you bring it to the clinical context or other things that we might have going on in life. Even like in clinical practice, you might have had like a near miss with a patient, right? You might have nearly made a mistake. It doesn't matter if you nearly made a mistake or whether you made a mistake. You might find that you have a similar emotional processing to do, right? Because you're so scared of yourself. Like you're so like, oh God, that nearly happened or whatever. And I guess like saying, oh, but it didn't happen, or just pipe down, just stop kind of winding yourself up. That's not actually going to help in those situations. And I guess other situations come up to do with future thinking, like the exam, for example, like what if I fail? Or, oh God, I just did a really bad short case. So, oh God, that means I'm going to fail or something. And those thoughts, even though they're not necessarily true, they can do this same thing. So I just think there's lots of different ways this shows up. And I'm curious as to what you're thinking, Beck, in terms of like, how has this shown up for you in your life or with your clients? Like, do you see this quite a lot where the emotion comes up and it needs to play out?
This morning, I had a terrorizing experience. I was sitting in the car. I just popped my little doggy back in the car. And then as I was going to start the engine, I saw this little dog, another dog, thankfully not my dog, but still just as terrorizing, another dog run out in front of me. I was a parked car. But then the dog, and I saw the owner out of the side of my eye, and the dog proceeded to run onto the road. And then I saw out of the other side of my vision a car coming. And within the space of seconds, and I obviously the panic was, oh my goodness, this dog is going to get hurt. Nervous system activated, fight or flight system activated, sympathetic mode on. And then within seconds, I saw with my own eyes, the reality was that dog was scooped up. The car stopped, the owner scooped up the dog was in the owner's safe arms, feeling safe. And I was literally talking to Kristeen on the phone in that moment, guys. And it stopped me. It grabbed me. I was giving her like a, oh my gosh. And she would have seen, you could listen back to that audio message. And it was the moment that I saw the dog was safe, that I was okay. But there was this refractory period afterwards where I was still in that full sympathetic response. I was still in that full flight or fight mode. And it took me the whole drive home for me to slowly feel like I could turn my nervous system down from that state, right? And so again, the situation here is that the reality is nothing has gone wrong. Nobody has been hurt. And also, we as humans are still experiencing this effect on our body as if something has gone wrong or something is about to go wrong. And that's really the key of what we wanted to talk about here today, guys, that just because the reality has proven itself to be safe and good in that moment, it doesn't mean that your body will instantly have a correction to that reality, right? And there's probably this is not entirely accurate, but it's a really nice little analogy that helps you think about how your biology works, how the emotional and nervous system and energetic part of your body works, is this little anecdote of your thoughts are like electricity. You can switch the electricity on and off, but your emotions are chemistry, right? And chemistry can't just be switched off. You think about setting a chemical reaction into motion. You can't just switch that off like you can switch off electricity. That energy now runs its course. That energy now has to complete what it's set out in unless it's intervened on in another way. And there are very few ways that you can intervene on that energy moving once it's been activated, aren't there? So when people talk about, you might have heard people talk about this, give off this one-liner of your emotions are always valid. And for me, I heard that. I've heard it for years and years and years. I feel like I've probably heard it when I was a younger child. Like it's something that people do say a lot. Your emotions are valid. But it's only been the last couple of years since really understanding on this level what's happening in my mind and in my body that I really appreciated what that means. Because I think I used to think, but our emotions aren't always valid, because sometimes my emotions, like say I'm really angry with somebody and I'm like, well, that emotion's not valid because I'm angry with this person and in this case, I'm angry with this person from a misunderstanding. I'm angry with this person because I'm thinking that they did something on purpose, or they were being careless, or they were being unfair or unreasonable. But actually, that's not the truth. But that's where my anger is coming from. It's coming from these thoughts about how this person was being unreasonable. And in that case, I'm like, you know what? My anger isn't valid. It's coming from a false premise. And this is the little misunderstanding we want you guys to correct in order to do this intersection, this intervention on this problem, so that you can start to actually respond in a more skillful way. Here is the key. Your emotions are always valid in that they are real, experiential things happening in your body. That emotion is a valid experience. Now, the reason that your mind has created this emotional or energetic reaction in you. The reason that your body's nervous system has been set off might not be valid, in that it might not be a true premise as to why your body is activated in that moment. For example, in the case of Kristeen's story, the person that she was worried about, the subject of the story was worried about, was already proven to be safe, right? The premise of that emotion, the thing that originally triggered that emotion, isn't true. But right there in that moment, even after the fact that she found out that he was actually safe, that emotion was still there in her body. And that was valid in the sense that it was a real thing that she was experiencing. And here's the key. Here's why this is so important. Because how you treat that emotion, that experience you're having in the moment, how you treat that, how you respond to that, will determine whether that emotion escalates and gets more powerful and takes over your energy and your control in that moment, or whether you can actually start to de-escalate and step down from that emotion. That is what Kristeen and I want to bring you today, guys. Because when you're in that moment and Kristeen sees this awfully painful situation that, probably every exam candidate goes through when they have that thought pop into their mind, what if I fail? Or this means I'm going to fail. In that moment, somebody who's a positive thinker or somebody who is, intellectually understands that kindness is important, they want to be compassionate to themselves, it's so easy in that moment to just tell yourself, just think positive. Don't think about that. Focus on something else. Just focus on what's going well and focus on what you can do. Focus on what's in your control. As much as that comes from this beautiful, positive, productive place, what you're doing in that moment is invalidating your emotional experience, right? Because again, that thought has occurred in your mind, not because you put it there, because your mind just offered it to you. And that set off this emotional or even sympathetic reaction in your body. And when you dismiss it and you say, I shouldn't be feeling this, I should be feeling something different, you're invalidating that emotional experience. And we want you guys to intersect here at this point and recognize that that emotional response, that energetic response, that nervous system response, even just think about the fact that when you activate your nervous system, it sets off all these hormones into your body. It puts your heart into a different rhythm. Think about how that effect has been set off, and you can't just switch it off straight away, but instead you need to honor and respect, or even just not be in denial that this is happening, and you need to treat yourself accordingly.
Yeah, it's so true. And as you were talking about that, I had this kind of analogy come up, which is kind of like spark and flame. Like something sparks it off, but then once you've got the spark, you've got the fire, and then whatever wood is like holding that fire going, it's gonna burn out eventually. And then there's this sort of opportunity where you don't want to like add more fuel to the fire, be that like a little block of wood or be that petrol, which I think is like spiraling. You know how when you do that thing when you spiral and you just keep adding in negative stuff? I feel like that's putting petrol on. But then equally what you're saying is toxic positivity is not the fire extinguisher. Like the best fire extinguisher is probably just letting it fizzle out. Just don't feed it anymore. Like allow it to be a fire, because maybe it's not the best analogy, but
no, I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Because what you're saying, and the thing that I really want to zoom in on, is don't feed it. And we think that we're not feeding it by trying to be positive. We think that that's what not feeding it is. We're trying to compartmentalize like that. But we want you guys to recognize the detrimental effect of invalidating that emotional experience, of being in denial of it, or even dissing it, criticizing it, being frustrated with yourself over it. When if you could just let that fire fizzle out, as Kristeen's saying, it will naturally run its course. Just don't feed it, just let it fizzle out. That is the way forwards with the least resistance. The analogy that I like to talk about, just because I am a terrible cook, so I experience this all the time, is when I'm cooking pasta and I got this pot of boiling water, I put the pasta in the pot. I'm forever trying to work out the perfect ratio to prevent this problem from happening, but I cannot. That water hits this boiling point, and inevitably the water, with all its energy and the heat, the water starts to boil up over the pot and spill out on the edges. And my instinctual reaction to stop that energy from creating that problem is to put the lid on the pot. I think that's going to solve the problem. Adding that resistance, pushing that water and all the energy that's now within it down, all the steam down. But all that does is it has the water and the steam just lifts the lid such that the energy can spill out over the sides. I want you to think about this is the extent of utility that you have when you try to put a lid on your own emotional, energetic, sympathetic reaction happening in your body. You can put the lid on it and you'll find that the lid is no match for that energy wanting to move through your body. And worse than that, you actually make the energy within the pot more forceful, don't you? When you add that resistance back against it, that resistance becomes even more forceful. If you've ever had that experience of the tears just pouring out of you in the worst context that you don't want it to happen in, but it's just this unstoppable force of tears falling out of you, I feel like it's the perfect analogy of what's happening here with the pot, because that energy has now become so incredibly strong that now your resistance, no matter how much resistance, can stop that energy from spilling over the edges. So it really is just this very simple step of not resisting the energy. As Kristeen said, it's sparked off in your body. It's got a course that it now needs to run. Think of it like chemistry. It's got a course that it needs to run. And when you're trying to be positive or even critical, of course, of the emotional experience that you're having and telling yourself you shouldn't be feeling this way because, the reality doesn't match up with it. My thought's not true, so therefore I shouldn't have this emotion right now. That's resistance. That's the lid. That's making it stronger. And what people don't understand, because it feels pretty paradoxical, is if you just spent a few seconds, a few minutes letting that energy move, its power will dissipate. And it will no longer be something that you need to get rid of anyway, because it will become less and less powerful as the energy just gets to move and run in the course that it wants to. So I love Kristeen's story because it so beautifully demonstrates this little mistake, this little misunderstanding that we have, that just because the reality is non-threatening or not a problem, that everything's actually okay in the reality, that we shouldn't be feeling the emotion that we're feeling, and actually recognizing it's totally not only possible, but very normal and common for us to have this distressing thought that activates our nervous system. And at that point, it's not productive to diss it or dismiss it. In some cases it works, but in a lot of cases it doesn't work. And all it will cost you, again, in a lot of cases, not in all cases, but it's possible that all it could cost you in this situation is just a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds of honoring that energy. This is a very nuanced, specific intervention point, but the amount of control that it will give back to you is profound in terms of being able to stop that stress spiral from getting to the point of the total lack of control that we've all experienced when we just feel like our nervous system is activated up to our ears. That point where I'm picturing the water is up to our ears and it's like, that's about our eye height and it starts to spill out of our eyeballs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's sort of, because what we're saying here is like when you're in a situation, whether it was your imagination, whether it matched up with reality or not, you've sparked off your nervous system by having this thought or your worst fear, something like that, and you're adrenalizing, you're doing all that. And the fire is here. And what we're sort of saying is once the fire is burning, like you let it fizzle out, and toxic positivity or self-judgment and criticism, they are not going to help that fire dissolve quickly. But I think in terms of practical things when you are here, I think something that you gave me, Becc, during a coaching session was the concept of course. Like, I think if we say to ourselves, like, oh my God, like I thought something happened to my dad and he's actually okay, but now I'm all stressed out. And then if you just sort of say to yourself, oh, of course you feel upset. Like, of course, like if we can say to ourselves, of course, then we are validating the experience. And so, oh, I'm worried I'm going to fail my exam. Of course you're worried about that because you've got this ambitions for a career. Like just that the of course part, I feel like is a dissolution in and of itself. It's an acceptance, but it's also always true, right? Like we can always, and then we start to like empathize with ourselves and be like, oh, how did I get here? Oh, of course, this is how I got here. So I feel like that's like when the fire is burning, of course, of course it's
Yes.
burning, you know?
Yes.
But then there's like another opportunity, like where if you keep setting off said fire because of a thought, maybe it is because you've got like a stressful rotation or things are happening in your daily practice that are stressing you out, or maybe you do have like a constant situation at home that's stressing you out, and this is happening. Whatever is sparking your fire, if it's a repetitive thing, because obviously sometimes these things, like that dog today, you're going to hope that's not going to happen every day. That was like a very unique scenario. But there are other scenarios where we have a little bit more jurisdiction in terms of we can see the patterns within ourselves. And there is an opportunity at that time of sparking the fire where we could dissipate things by having like watching out for it and maybe being kinder to ourselves. So I'm curious, Beck, as to what you think about that place where we realize that we are sparking the fire. We keep seeing the same fire. And as much as we can say, of course there's a fire because of XYZ, like I think it would be quite useful to be able to not start the fire. So what would what would you say would be the best approach?
Can I just say first, thank you for bringing up the of course technique. It taps you into what your mind is doing and what your body is doing and helps you realize I'm just a human with a human brain here. And I'm feeling feelings because I'm having thoughts and I'm having thoughts because I'm a human. The of course technique is just so simple and impactful. It's one of these super easy, super pick up and grab and use in the moment kind of techniques that actually is incredibly high yield. And I just want to point out for everybody to use that there are two levels of this, of course, in terms of where you can use it. So you can use the of course on the level of your emotions or at the level of your thought. And this is what each sounds like. So using it at the level of your emotion sounds like, of course, I'm having this emotion when I'm thinking this thought. Right? Recognizing the emotion is a totally appropriate, reasonable response to having that thought. If anybody was having that thought, they'd probably have that same emotional reaction or something similar to it. That's the first level of a course, and it's the level that I think is most impactful for this situation. And the other level that Kristeen dropped in as well was also the of course to do with your thoughts. So that's recognizing that your brain will just produce thoughts, accidentally, innocently produce untrue thoughts or just not useful thoughts and thoughts that aren't in your best character, in your integrity, in your identity. You can't stop that from happening. Your brain is fear-based, it's biased, it's got a negativity bias. So of course, my brain, my human brain is producing this thought, right? We don't need to make ourselves wrong or decide that something's going wrong or believe the thought just because it's appeared in our mind. Of course, my mind is producing this thought. So a really powerful technique that's really easy and it's so impactful. I'd love you guys to let us know the first time you use this of course technique in your life. It's one that came up intuitively just from working with people on this thought and emotion level of their mindsets. And it's probably one of my favorite ever coaching tools I have created. It's incredible. Now, to answer this powerful question that you've asked in terms of really what you're saying here, Kristeen, is there's also a cure here. You know, we're talking about how we can respond differently and how that sets us off onto a different path. We can respond differently to our emotions and our energy and our nervous system activation, and that can change our whole day. And also, we can even approach this at the source. We can turn the stove off at the source, i.e., we can stop the energy source, the thoughts, from sparking or alighting that fire. And this is something that is more of an advanced place that we can go. It's something that we can achieve with practice, with conditioning, i.e. with disciplined coaching. And this is exactly the kind of transformation that we offer in my group coaching program, Dear Darling. We offer this transformation that you can only get through practice and the skill building that comes with it. But just quickly, we want to offer you a couple of tangible, practical techniques and takeaways that you can try in your life from today. So the first one is when your brain offers you, we've got this situation that we brought up where your brain is saying, what if I don't pass my exams? It's offered you that possibility. Paradoxically, one of the most powerful things that you can do as somebody listening to this podcast who is, I'm willing to bet thousands of dollars, a highly resourceful person. This is a technique that highly resourceful people can use for these what if scary kind of scenarios. And that is going to the worst case scenario. So what we do is we keep stepping closer and closer and closer by asking, and then what? And then what? So what? So what? Keep asking. Ask at least 5 times. And then what? What am I really afraid of at the end? What do I think that I can't handle at the end? And that will help you show yourself what truly the problem is here, what your brain really thinks is the problem. Sometimes in that process, you'll figure out, oh, it's not actually a problem at all. I was actually there's a misunderstanding here. And sometimes you'll get all the way to that worst case scenario. We did one of these in Dear Darling a couple of weeks ago. And what she thought, which she was afraid of, was different to what she was actually afraid of or what her brain was afraid of. And in that moment, when she faced that, she was like, oh, I would just do ba, ba, ba. And therefore, I would actually be okay. I wouldn't lose anything that was irreversibly damaging, or there wouldn't be anything there that I couldn't recover from. And just imagine the level of resourcefulness that realization gives you when previously it was sparking this fear and this idea that you're not going to be okay. So this technique is incredibly beautiful and powerful to the point that we've actually done a whole podcast on it. So we'll link that down below. Going to the worst case scenario, or I have an analogy for it, which is fear of the fog. The next thing you can do is vaccinate yourself. And this is something that I talk about in terms of preparing your responses or getting clear about your responses to your brain's fears in advance. If you're somebody who knows, as Kristeen said, you can recognize these thoughts recur in our mind, these same thoughts. So you know this is something that has the ability to threaten you and potentially harm you in your life. And with that beautiful self-awareness, instead of beating yourself up and saying, oh my goodness, it's so frustrating and annoying that my brain will just keep offering me this thought, you can be like, wait a second, this is incredible that I can see this is an obstacle for me. And now I can do something to address it. So when I say vaccinate yourself, what I'm saying here is take that awareness of that threat, that thought that your mind will offer you. What if I fail my exam? And decide in that moment, what do I actually think about that? How, in my best self, when I'm in my resourceful mode, how do I answer that question? What's my response to that? And the fear of the fog might be one way you address it, but there might be other ways that you come up with that address how you'd like to respond. By doing that in advance of the situation happening, right before the fire has been lit, before all those challenging emotions and energy and the fight or flight mode is in your body, which actually shunts blood flow and changes the chemical makeup of the hormonal makeup of your brain and makes it harder for you to think in novel ways. If you can do this in advance, when you're in a more resourceful mode, it's kind of like giving yourself that vaccination. It's pre-preparing your body to have more accessibility to a response that actually protects you and supports you in that moment. And that's something that I use all the time in my life. I get this probably sounds sadistical to some people, but I get excited when I see points of vulnerability, like maybe somebody makes a comment to me that is offensive, or somebody said something to me that made me feel insecure. Those moments now make me excited when I see that, when I'm in a resourceful place, because I'm like, oh, this is so good. Now I can vaccinate myself in the comfort and resourcefulness of my own home, and therefore put myself in a better position for that vulnerability that I wasn't aware of. It means that the next time, I'm challenged in a more high stakes situation, I'm more prepared. It's a great thing. So use this awareness, this beautiful self-awareness you have of these challenging thoughts to vaccinate yourself against them. Finally, and this is one of Kristeen's favorite, it is being careful with your words, being careful with how you speak to yourself, and speaking to yourself in a way that sets you up for abundance and the best case scenario. And I absolutely love this technique too. And this is simply, recognizing your brain is asking, what if I fail the exam? And it's pretty easy cognitively to make a little switch from there and be like, well, what if I pass the exam? What if everything's actually going to be perfectly okay? Because just think about this logically, guys. If there's a possibility, if it's just one possibility that you won't pass the exam, isn't it reasonable to say that there's a possibility that you will pass the exam at the same time? We are saying that we don't know what's going to happen. And so just see if you've got room in your brain there. If it's willing to be fanciful and delusional and believe it can predict the future about not passing the exam, well then, hey brain, are you willing to do the same for the opposite scenario too? If this is the principle that you're running off, that you're going to buy into what ifs, then let's be a little bit more logical here and allow this to happen, not just for the negative things, not just to be biased to the negative, but to give a bit of fuel give a bit of equal airtime, attention to the what if for the positive too. And we just want to emphasize these techniques are just a few of the many different ways that you can help your mind to work with you and not work against you. But the thing we really want you to take away from this episode is attending to the energy on your body first. All of these techniques are more useful and more impactful when the fire has fizzled, when you're not alit, when the energy and the fear response is not in your body. And actually, in one of the next episodes to come, we're going to give you some quick little shortcuts to get more into a parasympathetic mode. So make sure you're subscribed to the podcast to not miss out on them, because it's so fun to have all these little quick fixes that are just little advantages that are easy to do, yet really impactful. But really, we've got to recognize what state we're in to recognize what techniques are actually applicable and useful to us in these moments.
Yeah, and I guess I love that I'm such a visual person, and after all of this episode, I have this beautiful little, I hope you all do too at home, have this lovely analogy in your mind. You can see the spark, the fire. We know now that if you've got a fire burning, you just let it fizzle out. You do not you definitely don't pour petrol on the fire, but also there's a pot now on top of the fire that's bubbling up with emotion. You don't want to put the lid on that. Just let it be. You're going to make it worse if you try and put the lid on. Like Becc said, it's in the energy. And then now, not only do we have all of that in our arsenal, we also have just cutting off the gas supply so the spark can't really do anything. She gave us a vaccination. Love it. Love it. So I want you all to remember that spark, fire, pot, stove situation and go forth. We hope that this episode helped, and we can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye.
I've been waiting all my life for something. I've been down the darkest roads and up in the clouds, but I've always felt that something's missing. That was until I found you.